He lost his job with his daughter asleep in his arms. What he didn't know was that the woman watching from the shadows was about to change everything. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The office smelled like burnt coffee and old rubber, familiar and suffocating, all at once. Michael Turner stood just inside the door, boots damp from slush, his work jacket clinging to the heat of a body that hadn't had a proper break in hours. Emily lay nestled against his shoulder, her tiny arms looped loosely around his neck, her soft breath warming the side of his jaw as she dozed, completely unaware her father's world was about to tilt. Rick Dalton didn't even look up from his desk when he spoke. "You're late." Again. Michael shifted Emily gently, adjusting her weight. "I know, I'm sorry. Her sitter canceled. She's not feeling great and—" Rick raised a hand, cutting him off. "We've been over this, Mike. You're a great mechanic, but this place doesn't run on goodwill. It runs on timelines, deadlines, and showing up when you're supposed to." Michael opened his mouth, closed it again. He could have said a dozen things. That he worked overtime for free last week, that he stayed late to finish that transmission job no one else wanted, that he never complained, not once, not when paychecks were short or parts were delayed. But all of it would fall flat. Rick wasn't here for explanations. He was here for closure. "I'm sorry," Rick said, finally looking up. His tone didn't match the words. "We have to let you go." Michael blinked, the words taking a second to land. "You're firing me while I'm holding my kid." Rick looked past him, already done with the conversation. "Clean out your tools by the end of the day." Michael swallowed hard, his throat burning. Emily stirred lightly, but didn't wake. He turned, jaw tight, and walked back through the garage without another word. The others glanced away, awkward and guilty, as he passed. No one said a thing. Outside, snow flurries danced through the morning light. Across the street, parked just beyond the corner, a black SUV idled quietly. The woman inside leaned forward slightly, watching the man with the child in his arms disappear into the cold. She didn't know his name yet. But something about the way he walked, with dignity, even in defeat, made her press her fingertips to the glass and whisper, "Who are you?" Harper Bennett sat in the driver's seat of her SUV, engine running low and steady, the heated leather doing little to thaw the unease curling in her chest. She hadn't meant to stop here, hadn't meant to see anything at all. She was supposed to be on her way to the airport, another investor meeting, another fake smile, another boardroom full of men who called her kiddo, even as they asked for her signature. But she'd taken a wrong turn, or maybe it wasn't wrong at all. Through the windshield, she'd watched the man walk out of the building with a child in his arms. At first she thought it was sweet, some blue-collar dad picking up his daughter after work. But then she saw the look on his face. Not hurried, not tired, hollow, a kind of quiet that shouted. He didn't slam the door behind him. He didn't shout or shake his head or pace like her brother Richard would have. He just walked, steady, like he was used to carrying the weight of the world in one arm and a sleeping child in the other. Harper leaned closer, resting her elbow against the window. Her breath fogged the glass as the man stepped carefully over a snowbank, adjusting the girl's little pink hat so it covered her ears. His coat was too thin for this weather. The child's boots looked worn through at the soles. She should have driven off. She didn't know this man, and he didn't know her, but something about him held her in place. There was a familiarity in his quiet, not in where he came from, but in what he carried. Harper had everything on paper: a corner office, a trust fund, a last name that opened doors. But she hadn't seen someone care that much, with that little, in a long time, and she couldn't look away. The man disappeared around the block. Still, Harper didn't move. She stared at the spot he'd just been, her fingers frozen on the steering wheel. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but for the first time in months, she wanted to do something that didn't come with an agenda, something human. The snow crunched beneath Michael's boots, a steady rhythm against the silence that stretched between buildings and blinking traffic lights. Emily's head rested on his shoulder, her breath warm against the side of his neck. Her small fingers curled into the fabric of his jacket, like she was afraid he might disappear. She was still asleep, blissfully unaware that everything had just fallen apart. He adjusted her weight slightly, careful not to jostle her too much. The backpack slung over his other shoulder bounced with each step, filled with her crayons, homework, and the peanut butter sandwich she hadn't touched. His own stomach had been empty since breakfast, but hunger wasn't the loudest ache today. The cold bit at his ears, the wind sneaking down the collar of his coat, but Michael barely felt it. All he could feel was the pressure mounting behind his eyes and the burning throb in his legs as he trudged through the snow. He didn't have the gas to drive them home, and even if he had, he didn't want Emily to wake up in a car that couldn't afford heat. He passed shuttered shops and quiet diners, their windows glowing gold from inside. Families sat laughing behind glass, people with jobs, people with plans. He tried not to resent them. They weren't the problem. Life just had its favorites. "We'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I'll figure it out. I always do." Emily stirred, mumbling something in her sleep. He kissed the top of her head and kept walking, trying to believe his own words. They reached their building as the sky turned a bruised shade of purple. The steps creaked under his weight. The door stuck like always. Inside, the air was still, stale. He kicked off his boots and laid Emily down on the old couch, covering her with a blanket thin enough to fold into a drawer. He looked around the room, the flickering lamp, the overdue bill tacked to the fridge, the floor heater clicking inconsistently. Then he sat beside her, rested his elbows on his knees, and whispered again, "We'll be okay." But this time even he wasn't sure what that meant. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the background, its chipped surface plastered with Emily's drawings, stick figures holding hands, a lopsided heart with the word "Daddy" scribbled in purple crayon. But Michael's eyes weren't on the art. They were fixed on the new sheet of paper taped just above it. A plain white notice with red letters that felt louder than any scream. Notice to vacate. 10 days. Final warning. The words pulsed in his mind like a migraine. He didn't need to read the fine print. He already knew what it said. Missed rent. Repeated extensions. The landlord's sympathy had finally worn thin, and now the clock was ticking. Michael rubbed a hand down his face, the stubble scraping against his palm. 10 days. 10 days to find a new job, pay back rent, and somehow convince someone, anyone, that he was still worth betting on. All while making sure Emily had clean clothes, food on her plate, and no idea that the world under her feet was crumbling. Behind him, Emily's soft breathing rose and fell from the couch. She was still asleep, curled into a worn pillow with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm. He didn't want her to see it. The paper, the fear behind his eyes, the weight in his shoulders. She believed in magic, in heroes. He wasn't about to ruin that. Michael pulled the paper off the fridge, folding it neatly, like that might make it hurt less. He slid it into the drawer beneath the silverware, right beside the stack of unopened bills and his grandmother's old recipes he never had time to cook. He opened the fridge, half out of habit, half out of hope. There was a jug of milk that needed sniffing, 3 eggs, and the last corner of a grilled cheese Emily hadn't finished. He closed the door without taking anything. Tomorrow he'd start again, call every shop in town, offer to fix things for cheap, knock on doors if he had to. But tonight he just sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, listening to the soft whir of the fridge and the steady breath of the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. Morning sunlight crept through the crooked blinds, casting long stripes across the floor, where Emily sat cross-legged with construction paper, glue, and a serious look on her face. Michael rubbed his eyes as he shuffled into the living room, still groggy from a night of worry and no sleep. He expected the usual, cartoons, cereal, mismatched socks, but today his daughter had a mission. "Don't look," she squeaked when she saw him. "It's not ready yet." Michael raised his hands in surrender, managing a tired smile. All right, I'm not looking. He made coffee, black and bitter, and sat quietly at the edge of the couch while Emily huddled over her project, tongue poking out in concentration. Scraps of bright paper littered the floor around her, and a plastic jar, the kind that once held peanut butter pretzels, sat in the center of it all. Finally, she stood, eyes wide with excitement, and presented the jar like it held treasure. "This," she announced, "is your job jar." Michael blinked. "My what?" She grinned. "I made it for you. Whenever you feel sad or like you don't know what to do next, you pull a job from the jar. There's a bunch, and one of them is bound to work." He reached for it gently, the plastic crinkling in his hands. Inside were dozens of folded notes, scribbled in crayon and marker, each labeled in her careful, uneven handwriting. Race car mechanic, ice cream truck driver, dinosaur bone digger, superhero. Michael laughed, a real one, low and surprised. "These are pretty impressive resumes." Emily beamed. "Someone out there must want you, Daddy. You're too good not to hire." His throat tightened. He wasn't sure if it was the words or the way she'd said them. So certain, so matter of fact, like the world just hadn't caught up to how great her dad was yet. He pulled one slip at random. "Rocket fixer." "Well," he said, ruffling her hair, "guess I better brush up on my spaceship repair skills." Emily giggled and hugged him tight, her little arms wrapped around his neck. And for the first time in days, Michael felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of options. The Bennett building sat like a glass and steel monument to everything Harper hated. Cold, pristine, untouchable. The elevator chimed as she stepped out onto the executive floor, heels silent against the polished marble. She didn't knock. She never did. Richard's assistant barely glanced up as she breezed past his desk and pushed open the office door. Richard Bennett sat behind his oversized desk, scrolling through something on his tablet, eyebrows knit in the way they always were when numbers didn't do what he wanted. He didn't look up. "If this is about the annual board dinner, I already told Mom I'm not inviting your flavor of the month," he muttered. "This isn't about dinner," Harper said coolly, arms crossed. That made him pause. He looked up, suspicious. "Then what is it?" "Michael Turner." Richard blinked once, twice. "Who?" "The mechanic. You fired him yesterday." He leaned back in his chair, sighing. Oh, him. Yeah, chronic lateness, always an excuse. Brought his kid to work half the time. Nice guy, but unreliable. You know how this works, Harper. Her jaw tightened. "I know how you work. But did you even stop to think that maybe he was doing the best he could with what he had?" Richard snorted. "That man is a walking liability. You think we can afford to babysit mechanics with sob stories? We run a business, not a shelter." Harper stepped forward. "No, you run a business. I fund it. And I'm telling you, people like Michael, they're the ones holding this company together, the ones doing the actual work." He rolled his eyes. "And what, you want to rehire him out of pity? Write a press release about how we're the charity arm of Bennett Auto?" "No," she said quietly. "I just think you fired someone worth more than you realize." Richard stood, grabbing his blazer. "Look, Harper, if you want to run your foundation, run it. But don't come storming into my office lecturing me about some grease monkey you saw on your way to brunch." She stared at him, eyes steady. "Maybe if you spent more time with people who get grease under their nails, you wouldn't be so damn heartless." He didn't respond, and Harper didn't wait for one. She turned and left, fire simmering in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she had no idea what she was going to do next, but she knew it was going to matter. The cafe was the kind of place Harper used to frequent when she was still pretending to enjoy networking. Quiet jazz in the background, minimalist decor, waitstaff that knew her name but never asked too many questions. Her untouched salad sat wilting in front of her, a lone glass of sparkling water sweating on a coaster. She wasn't here for food, not really. She stared out the window, watching people pass by in bundled coats and hurried steps, lives moving on in neat lines. But her thoughts kept looping, caught on the image she couldn't shake. Michael Turner, standing in that bleak garage office, holding his daughter like the world hadn't just kicked him in the teeth. She had watched him walk away, his boots crunching snow, the little girl's head tucked into his shoulder like she didn't even need to open her eyes to trust him. And Harper, from the warmth of her SUV, had felt something tug inside her, sharp and unfamiliar. Not guilt, not pity, something closer to recognition. She picked up her fork, stabbed a piece of lettuce, and put it down again. She hated how much space this stranger was taking up in her head. She'd seen 100 stories like his before, people down on their luck, people struggling to make ends meet. They didn't usually stay with her, but this one had. Maybe it was the way he hadn't begged, the way he hadn't looked back, hadn't raged, hadn't broken down. He had just carried his daughter out into the cold, like that was the only thing that mattered. The waitress came by and asked if she needed anything else. Harper shook her head and offered a polite smile. Just the check. As the woman walked away, Harper pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and typed something without thinking. Michael Turner, single dad, fired Thursday, daughter, age 6 or 7. Quiet, proud, honest. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she added one more line. Why can't I forget him? The wind cut sharper that morning, slicing through Harper's wool coat despite the scarf wrapped tightly at her neck. She parked across the street from the garage again. Different spot, same view. This time she didn't pretend it was an accident. She'd told herself it was just curiosity, that she was only passing through, but her GPS hadn't glitched. Her car didn't stall, and this wasn't a detour, it was a decision. The garage looked quieter than before. Half the bays were closed and the office lights flickered as if on their last breath. A folding sign out front read, "Repairs 20 and up, ask for Mike." It looked like desperation written in marker. She watched for a moment, hands tucked in her coat pockets. Then the office door creaked open, and there he was, Michael, in the same threadbare jacket, hands stained with grease, a wrench hanging from his back pocket. He knelt beside a rusted sedan, tightening something beneath the wheel. And then he smiled, just slightly, as a little boy handed him a juice box from the curb. Emily wasn't with him this time, but Harper could still feel the echo of that first moment. Him holding her trusting him. She crossed the street, heels crunching over a patch of salted sidewalk. As she approached, Michael looked up, squinting against the sun. For a second he didn't recognize her. Then he stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "You, again?" he said, cautiously polite. "Small town," she offered with a shrug. "Hard to stay anonymous." He nodded but didn't smile. "Didn't peg you for the local type." "I'm not," she admitted. "Just curious. I saw the sign." Michael glanced over his shoulder. "It's not much. Just trying to stay afloat until something permanent comes through." "People still need help," she said. "Yeah," he muttered, eyes down. "They just don't always have the money for it." She didn't say anything at first. She didn't want to offer charity. She just wanted to understand. "Well," Harper said, forcing a casual tone, "if you ever want to fix something that isn't on its last legs, I've got a car that could use an oil change, and I pay fair." Michael studied her for a beat. Then he nodded once. "All right, bring it by tomorrow." She walked away, pretending not to feel relieved, but deep down she already knew this wasn't the last time she'd come looking for him. The next morning came wrapped in gray clouds and the kind of cold that settled in your bones. Harper pulled into the lot just as Michael was rolling up the shop's battered garage door, his breath puffing out in small clouds. Her car idled quietly behind him, the sleek engine sounding almost arrogant in the silence. He turned when he heard her door open. Same jacket, same guarded eyes. She held up 2 paper cups, like a peace offering. "Brought coffee," she said, stepping forward. Michael hesitated. His eyes flicked from the cups to her face, then back again. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said softly, "but I did." Still, he didn't reach for one. Harper kept her smile steady. even as she lowered the cups. Thought it might warm your hands, or your day, or something. He gave a small shake of his head, not dismissive, just unsure. Look, I appreciate it, really, but I don't know what this is. She paused. It's coffee. No, he said gently. It's more than that. You keep showing up, asking questions, offering things. People don't do that unless they want something. Harper felt the truth of his words settle between them. He wasn't being rude. He was being real. Life had trained him to expect a catch, and maybe, deep down, she didn't blame him. I don't want anything, she said finally. I just saw you that day, and something about it stuck. Michael looked away, pretending to check a wrench on the workbench. Lots of people see things. Most just drive by. I didn't, she said. A beat passed, then he turned back to her. You should go before that coffee gets cold. Harper nodded, swallowing the urge to say more. She set one cup down on the bench near him and turned to leave. As she walked away, she didn't hear him pick it up, but she didn't hear him throw it out either. And for now, that was enough. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall and the occasional groan from the pipes. Emily was asleep, her small body bundled beneath a tower of mismatched blankets, one leg kicked out like she owned the whole mattress. Michael stood over the stove, reheating soup from a can he didn't remember buying, the label half peeled and scorched at the edge. Outside, winter pressed harder against the windows, and just below them, the sound of coughing echoed faintly through the thin drywall. Mrs. Patel lived in the unit below, widowed, 72, and too proud to ask for help. But Michael had noticed her light flickering all night, the faint scent of something burning in the hallway. That's why, instead of eating, he packed up his tools. The heater in her apartment hissed like an angry cat, barely working, long overdue for a replacement. She had insisted she'd called someone, but Michael knew better. So he crouched in front of it, fingers numb, tightening bolts and adjusting lines, while she made him weak tea and talked about her late husband's love for jazz. You're always fixing something, she said softly, watching him from her recliner. But when's the last time someone fixed anything for you? Michael didn't look up. I don't need fixing. Mrs. Patel just nodded slowly, like someone who'd stopped arguing with men a long time ago. It took an hour to get the heat running, another to make sure it would stay that way. When he finally stood, his back ached and his hands were black with soot. But the vents rattled with a new kind of life. Warm air spilled into the room. Mrs. Patel smiled with glassy eyes. He wouldn't take her money. He never did. Back upstairs, he stood for a long moment in the kitchen, staring at the cooling soup. The house was quiet again, the world still heavy. He opened the fridge, shoved the bowl inside, and sat at the table in the dark. Michael Turner could fix cars, heaters, fences, engines, and everything in between. But when it came to himself, he didn't even know where to begin. Emily's 7th birthday arrived with gray skies and wind that rattled the window panes. The kind of day that made you want to stay under the covers and forget the world outside. But she was up early, feet padding against the cold floor, wearing the same hand-me-down birthday dress from last year, now shorter at the sleeves. Michael had done what he could. He picked up a pack of dollar store cupcakes, the kind with neon frosting and sprinkles that crunched like gravel. He'd scraped together just enough for a single pink candle and a tiny plastic tiara that he found on clearance. The gift, if it could be called that, was a used chapter book with bent corners and a mystery about a dog detective. She'd love it anyway. Emily loved anything that made her feel seen. They sat at the small table, the one with the chipped edges and the wobbly leg that Michael kept meaning to fix. He lit the candle carefully, shielding the flame from a draft, and smiled at his daughter with everything he had left in him. "Make a wish, birthday girl." Emily closed her eyes tight, cheeks puffed as she blew, and the candle flickered, trembled, then stayed lit. She blinked, surprised. Michael reached forward and pinched it out with his fingers, trying to hide the shake in his hand. "There," he said, voice too bright. "It worked." She giggled and clapped, though a trace of confusion lingered in her eyes. She didn't ask what he'd hoped she wouldn't notice. They split the cupcakes, one for each of them, the frosting staining their fingers. Michael sang the birthday song off-key, his voice catching halfway through, but Emily didn't seem to mind. She wore her tiara proudly, smiling like royalty in a crumbling castle. That night, as she curled into his side with her new book in hand, she whispered, "This was the best birthday ever." Michael kissed her forehead, held her a little tighter, and stared at the ceiling as guilt clawed quietly through his chest. He wanted to believe her. He needed to, but deep down, he knew she deserved balloons and so much more. Michael was sweeping the front steps with a worn-out broom when he saw the car pull up, sleek, black, unmistakably out of place in their neighborhood. He blinked once, twice, thinking maybe he was imagining it. But no, it was her, Harper. She stepped out of the driver's side with a large box tucked under one arm and a bag dangling from the other. No assistant, no entourage. Just Harper Bennett, standing in front of his building like she belonged there. Michael wiped his hands on his jeans, heart tightening. He hadn't seen her since the coffee incident, hadn't expected to, and now here she was, dressed in jeans and boots, looking almost like any other neighbor. Almost. "Didn't expect visitors," he said, meeting her halfway. "I didn't ask," she replied, not smug, just honest. "I heard it was Emily's birthday." His brows lifted. "How'd you, I might have asked someone at the garage." Before he could respond, the door behind him creaked open and Emily's voice rang out. "Dad? Who's that?" Harper smiled and crouched down, placing the box and bag at her feet. "Hi, Emily. I'm Harper. I brought you something." Emily ran out in mismatched socks, eyes wide as she spotted the box. "Is that for me?" "All of it," Harper said. "One's a cake, one's a pair of boots, because I saw yours had holes. And this?" She opened the long box carefully. Inside was a small telescope, black and silver, gleaming even in the overcast light. Emily gasped like it was Christmas morning. "A star-looker! I always wanted one of those." Michael stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or to just let the moment be. Emily threw her arms around Harper without hesitation. "Thank you! Thank you! This is the best birthday ever!" Harper looked over Emily's head at Michael, eyes soft. "I didn't mean to overstep." He shook his head slowly, voice barely there. "You didn't." As Emily twirled on the sidewalk in her new boots, telescope hugged tight against her chest, Harper stepped back. "I'll go," she said. "I just wanted her to have a memory." Michael watched her turn toward the car, emotions tangled in his throat. "She will," he said. "You gave her one I couldn't." The apartment smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. An ambitious effort on Michael's part, considering he'd used canned everything and a half box of noodles Emily had picked out for the stars on the packaging. But it didn't matter. Emily twirled her spaghetti like it was fine dining, and Harper sat at their rickety table without complaint, her cloth coat draped neatly over the back of the chair. They used paper plates because it was easier. They used tap water in mismatched mugs because that's what they had. But there was warmth in the room, a kind that hadn't been there in a long time. Michael noticed it. So did Harper. Neither mentioned it. Emily talked the most, her voice bouncing as she described her birthday telescope in vivid detail. "I'm going to find Jupiter. Or maybe a new star. If I find a new star, can I name it after Daddy?" Michael laughed quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. "You find a star, you can name it anything you want." Harper smiled, listening without interrupting. She hadn't expected to stay. She'd just wanted to drop off the gifts and leave. But when Michael asked if she wanted to stay for dinner, after Emily begged, she surprised herself by saying yes. Now, as Emily played with her telescope box on the floor, Harper sat across from Michael, twirling pasta and waiting. "You didn't have to come," he said finally, his voice low. "I know. I didn't know how to say thank you. You just did." He looked down at his plate, cleared his throat. "Things have been rough." She waited, giving him space. "My wife, Emily's mom, she passed 4 years ago. It's been just us ever since." Harper's fork paused midair. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Me too." For a long time neither spoke. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge and Emily's muffled giggles in the other room. "You're doing a good job," Harper said finally. Michael looked up, startled by how much those 5 words hit him. He nodded, the emotion catching him off guard. And just like that, something shifted. Not big, not loud, just a tiny opening between 2 people who had no reason to trust but every reason to try. The next morning, the sun rose reluctantly, casting a pale light through Michael's apartment window. He was already up, sleeves rolled, dishes from the night before drying on a towel by the sink. The smell of coffee, strong, cheap, dependable, filled the kitchen. Harper arrived just after 8, knocking lightly before letting herself in with a hesitant smile and a bag of fresh bagels. "Peace offering," she said. Michael gave her a curious look. "You don't strike me as someone who eats carbs." "I make exceptions," she said, stepping inside, "especially when there's a proposal involved." He raised an eyebrow. "I've been thinking," she continued, setting the bag on the counter. "I have a property, a guest house, actually. It's old and falling apart. Needs someone with your kind of skill. Repairs, odds and ends, just temporary. I'd pay you fairly." Michael leaned against the sink, arms crossed. "So this is a job offer?" "It's a way to buy you time," she said, voice calm. "No strings." He didn't answer right away. He stared past her toward the living room, where Emily's new boots were lined up perfectly by the door, her telescope box still proudly on display. "Why are you doing this, he asked finally. Harper shrugged. "Because you're capable, and you're raising an incredible kid, and because it's something I can do." He looked down, his jaw tight. "I'm not a project, Harper." Her expression didn't change. "I never said you were. I've had people try to fix me before. Usually ends with them realizing I don't fit whatever blueprint they had in mind." "I don't have a blueprint," she said softly. "I just have a broken guest house and a little faith in someone who deserves better." Silence settled between them like dust in morning light. Michael exhaled, slow and deliberate. "I'll think about it." Harper smiled. "That's all I was asking." As she turned to leave, he called out, "You really bought bagels?" She tossed one over her shoulder without turning. Everything bagel, for a guy who can apparently fix everything but his own pride. The wind howled outside like it was trying to claw its way through the brick walls. Snow blew sideways, piling fast against windows that rattled with each icy gust. Inside the apartment it was cold. Not the kind of cold you fight with another blanket, but the kind that crawls under your skin and settles there. Michael stood in front of the wall heater, flipping the switch back and forth, like that might make it remember how to work. Nothing. Just a low, sputtering hiss and the faint smell of burned dust. He opened the panel, jiggled wires, muttered something under his breath, but the old machine was done. It had been limping through winter on borrowed time. And tonight, it finally gave out. Emily was asleep on the couch under 3 blankets, her nose peeking out, her breath shallow. Her cheeks were pale, too pale. A soft cough escaped her lips, followed by another. Michael felt a chill deeper than the cold. He crouched beside her, brushing a hand across her forehead. She was warm, but not the good kind. He looked at the heater again, then at the window, where snowflakes swirled like static. Outside, everything was white, impassable. Inside, everything was silent, except for her cough. His phone sat on the counter, screen dark. A single name near the top of the recent calls list, Harper. He stared at it, swore under his breath. He didn't want to call her, didn't want to ask for help. But Emily coughed again, a dry, cracking sound that made his chest tighten. Michael picked up the phone. His thumb hovered. Then he tapped the screen. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" Her voice sharp with surprise but laced with concern. "It's me," he said, voice low. "I wouldn't ask unless I had to." "What happened?" "The heat's out, and the storm's only getting worse. Emily's not feeling great. I don't know what else to do." She didn't hesitate. "Pack a bag. I'm already on my way." Michael closed his eyes for a beat. Pride tasted bitter, but his daughter's safety was louder than his ego. He turned to Emily, wrapped her tighter, and whispered, "Help's coming, sweetheart. Just hold on." The driveway crunched under Harper's tires as her SUV pulled up to the main house, headlights cutting through the swirling snow. She jumped out before the engine stopped humming, coat flaring behind her, boots sinking ankle-deep into powder. The wind whipped at her face, but she didn't care. By the time she reached the guest house, its porch light glowing dimly through the storm, Michael was already there. Emily bundled in his arms beneath 3 layers of blankets. Harper swung open the door before he could knock. No hesitation, no questions, just a space that was ready for them. "Get inside," she said. "It's warm." Michael stepped through, careful not to jostle Emily, who stirred slightly at the change in temperature. The guest house wasn't extravagant. 1 main room, a small kitchen, and a lofted bedroom, but it had heat, real heat, the kind that melted fingertips and cleared foggy breath. A fire crackled in the old brick hearth, casting flickering shadows across the wood-paneled walls. Michael lowered Emily onto the couch closest to the flames. She stretched slightly and murmured, "It's the warmest place ever," before slipping back into sleep. Harper smiled softly and walked to the kitchen, pouring hot water into a chipped mug. "Chamomile, in case she wakes up." Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "She okay?" Harper asked. He nodded again. "She will be." The silence between them wasn't awkward this time. It was full, thick with everything he wanted to say, but didn't know how. "Thank you" felt too small. So he just stood there, watching the fire, his hands still trembling from the cold and something else he couldn't name. Harper leaned against the counter, arms crossed. This place needed life. It was just sitting here waiting for a reason. Michael looked at her, his voice quiet. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." He sat beside Emily, adjusting her blanket, and stared at the flames for a long time. And though the storm still howled outside, the room held a warmth that went deeper than fire. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The snow had softened to a whisper by the time Harper stepped outside. The storm was breaking, stars peeking through the thinning clouds like tiny defiant lights. She stood on the porch of the guest house, wrapped in a thick blanket, a mug of tea in her hands, steam curling toward the night sky. Michael joined her a few minutes later, the door clicking softly shut behind him. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the railing beside her, his arms folded, eyes on the horizon where the town lights blinked faintly through the white. "Emily's asleep," he said. Harper nodded. "She's strong, like her dad." Michael didn't smile, but he didn't deny it either. They stood in quiet for a while, then Harper spoke. "You ever feel like you were born into the wrong story?" He glanced at her, brow raised slightly. "My last name," she continued, "comes with expectations. Bennett means polished, powerful, strategic, the face on every quarterly report. My father made sure of that. So did Richard. And for a while I played the part. Perfect grades, Ivy League, sharp blazers, meetings with people who smiled at me like they were waiting for me to trip." Michael didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I was 19 when I realized I wasn't living a life. I was rehearsing one. Everything was calculated. Every friendship was political. Every mistake a scandal waiting to happen. So I built walls. Got really good at keeping people out, until I didn't know how to let anyone in." She paused, eyes on the stars. "I didn't leave the family business, not really, but I left the part that needed their approval. That's when I started investing in smaller things, local things, places no one cared about. It felt Real. Michael looked at her then, really looked. "You're not what I expected," he said. Harper smiled, the kind of smile that's equal parts tired and free. Most people expect a headline, not a human. He nodded. "Well, this human saved my daughter tonight. That counts for something." She met his gaze, and in the space between their silences, something honest passed through the cold. Not pity, not performance. Just understanding. It started as a way to keep his hands busy. A quiet walk around the property one morning led Michael down a narrow path behind Harper's estate, where frost-covered vines clung to the rusted bones of a forgotten structure. An old garage, long abandoned, windows cracked, doors sagging. The kind of place most people would pass without a second glance. But not Michael. He stood in front of it for a long time, Emily's laughter drifting faintly from the guest house behind him, the wind carrying the smell of damp pine and earth. The garage looked tired, worn out, still standing, but barely. He knew the feeling. The next day he returned with a broom and a crowbar. Not because anyone asked him to, not for money, just because he needed to do something that didn't end in survival, but in creation. Dust poured out in waves as he pried open the doors. Inside, the space was dark and silent, save for the soft creak of old wood settling. He swept until his arms ached, pried up rotted floorboards, collected every rusted nail into a bucket like he was saving their stories. Bit by bit, he breathed life into it. Harper found him there 2 days later, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow despite the cold. She leaned against the frame of the doorway, watching as he sanded down a splintered workbench. "You always fix things you don't own?" she asked. Michael didn't look up, only when they deserved better. She stepped inside, boots crunching on old sawdust. "I didn't even know this was still here." "It's got bones," he said, glancing around. "Could be something again." Harper nodded. "Then let it be." From that day on, he returned each morning. Emily helped him hang string lights from the rafters and stack salvaged wood along the walls. It wasn't about opening a business. Not yet. It was about finding rhythm again, noise he could control, nails that held. The garage didn't just hold tools, it held peace. A quiet corner of the world where Michael could be something other than tired, something closer to whole. Harper sat on the guest house porch with a mug of cocoa gone cold in her hands, watching Michael through the window of the old garage. He was shirt-sleeved despite the lingering chill, sleeves rolled, humming to himself as he sanded down a cabinet someone else would have tossed away. His movements were steady, focused, like the world slowed down for him when he worked. It had been days since he'd started reclaiming the space, and every morning he showed up before the sun, not for pay, not for recognition, just because it gave him something to build, something that asked nothing but care in return. She admired that, respected it, but that wasn't what had her heart quietly spiraling into unfamiliar territory. It was the way he looked at her, not like a Bennett, not like a boardroom asset, not like a checkbook with legs. He looked at her like she was human, like her stories mattered, like her silences didn't need filling. She'd spent most of her life wrapped in polish, an armor made of designer clothes and controlled expressions. But when Michael spoke to her, it was like he saw right through all of it and didn't flinch, didn't pull away, and that terrified her. She wasn't used to being seen without her layers. Vulnerability had always been something to be managed, never embraced. But here, in this snowy corner of nowhere, she was slowly shedding all the versions of herself she used to perform. And it was Michael's fault, or maybe it was his gift, the way he spoke to Emily like she was the most important person on the planet, the way he never bragged, never postured, the way he laughed without checking who was watching. He had no interest in her last name. He'd never asked about her company, her portfolio, her status. He cared more about fixing a broken hinge than climbing a social ladder. And somewhere between shared dinners and sawdust, Harper realized she was falling, not for a fantasy, not for a hero, but for the quiet man who saw through everything and stayed. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon just as Michael was tightening the last bolt on a rebuilt engine inside the garage. His phone buzzed on the workbench, screen lighting up with a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Most good news didn't come from unknown callers, but something told him to pick up. "Michael Turner?" the voice asked, crisp and professional. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Carl Henderson with Oak Ridge Automotive Group. Your name was passed along by a friend of a client. We've seen your work. Impressive stuff. We've got a position opening at our flagship shop in Springfield. Full-time, good salary, benefits. It's yours if you want it." Michael blinked, the wrench suddenly heavy in his hand. "You offering me a job?" he asked cautiously. "We're offering you a future," the man said with a chuckle. "Not many mechanics with your reputation and range. It's a solid place. Good people. And it'd give your daughter some stability, too." Michael looked across the garage where Emily's drawings were taped to the newly painted walls, stars and hearts, and a sign that read, "Daddy's Fix-It Palace." Outside, the guest house chimney puffed steady smoke into the winter sky. This wasn't just a workshop anymore, it was something deeper, something real. But Springfield meant full-time pay. Medical coverage, a proper school for Emily, heat that worked year-round, stability he hadn't felt since before everything fell apart. "When would you need an answer?" Michael asked. "Soon, by the end of the week. We can set up a visit if you'd like, but honestly, we're ready to move forward, if you are." After he hung up, he sat in the middle of the garage on an overturned crate, the phone still warm in his palm. This was what he'd been hoping for, wasn't it? A lifeline, a way out. But it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a choice between safety and something harder to define, a small, quiet life that had started to feel like home. He stared at the workbench, Harper's coffee mug still resting there from that morning. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. The apartment was quiet that night, the kind of stillness that settles after a long day of holding things in. Michael stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, the hum of the faucet masking the weight in his chest. The job offer had sat with him all day like a brick in his pocket. He hadn't told Emily. Not really. But he'd been on the phone earlier, talking numbers, timelines, asking about schools and housing. He thought she'd been playing in her room, but as he dried his hands on a towel and turned around, there she was, standing barefoot at the edge of the hallway, her hair messy from sleep, her rabbit clutched in one arm. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head, stepping into the light. "I heard you talking." Michael crouched down, guilt already tugging at the edge of his voice. "About work?" She nodded. "You said we might move." He hesitated. "I was just talking. Nothing's decided." Emily's bottom lip tucked under her teeth, something she did when she was nervous. "If we go, will we leave Harper behind?" The question hit harder than he was ready for. He tried to find a gentle way to answer, but all he could manage was, "Maybe." Emily looked down at her bunny. "But Harper's our friend. She gave me boots. She made us warm when it was storming. She says nice things to you, even when you don't believe them." Michael swallowed, throat tight. "I know. Will she be lonely if we go?" He wanted to tell her no, that grown-ups were strong, that people like Harper didn't get lonely, but he couldn't lie. "She might be," he said quietly. Emily stepped forward, her small hand wrapping around his. "Then maybe we should stay. You always say we don't leave people who help us." Michael pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his eyes stinging. She was 7. But somehow she always knew the things he was still trying to figure out. And that night, as she drifted off in his lap, her breathing slow and steady, he sat staring out the window at the guest house light still glowing in the distance, wondering what it meant to choose something that wasn't just safe, but right. The morning was quiet, the kind of calm that follows a heavy night. Michael stepped into the garage just after sunrise, the air crisp, the ground dusted with fresh snow. The lights he and Emily had strung along the rafters flickered to life as he flipped the switch, casting a soft amber glow over the space that had slowly become more than just walls and tools. It had become a place to breathe. He rubbed his hands together, ready to start patching the back corner wall. But something was different. There, sitting squarely on the center of the workbench, was a box he hadn't left there. A deep mahogany toolbox, polished smooth, with brass corners and a weight to it that spoke of intention. He approached slowly, his boots crunching over stray wood shavings, heart beginning to thump in that careful way it did when the world gave him something too good to trust right away. He ran his fingers across the lid before spotting the engraving burned into the top. "For the man who repairs what others throw away." His hand froze. The words hit deeper than any compliment ever had, because they saw him, not just the mechanic but the man beneath, the one who had stitched together a life with scrap and stubbornness, the one who refused to give up on broken things even when it would have been easier. Inside, every tool gleamed, new, professional, chosen. A full set, wrenches, ratchets, screwdrivers with wooden handles, even a small silver tag tucked in one corner, reading simply, "Build whatever matters." He knew who had left it. Harper's handwriting was on the tag. Her silence was in the gesture. He didn't need to call her. He didn't need to ask why. The gift said everything. Michael stood there for a long while, hands resting on the box, something heavy and grateful swelling in his chest. It wasn't about the tools. It was about being seen and not walked away from. And for the first time in years, he let the warmth settle in without trying to explain it away. The snow was falling softly, blanketing the woods behind the estate in quiet wonder. The air smelled clean, like pine and sky. And their footsteps crunched lightly along the narrow trail that wound past the frozen creek. Michael walked beside Harper, hands shoved into his coat pockets, breath fogging the air between them. Emily was back at the guest house, curled up with a book and a cup of cocoa. She'd practically pushed them out the door with a mischievous grin, insisting they go get some fresh air together. Michael hadn't argued. Now, in the hush of the woods, it was just them. No tools, no expectations, just the cold and the truth that had been building between them like pressure behind glass. "I have to tell you something," Harper said suddenly, her voice tight with nerves. Michael stopped, turning to face her. "Okay." She hesitated, brushing snow from her coat sleeve, like that would help her find the words. "I knew who you were, that day at the garage, the day you got fired. I was already there, watching." Michael didn't speak. His expression didn't shift, just steady, waiting. "I'd heard your name before," she continued. From Richard. He called you unreliable, said you were always dragging your kid around, always full of excuses. He made you sound like a burden." Michael's jaw flexed, but still, he said nothing. "I didn't believe him," she said, softer now. "But I didn't step in either. I just watched. And when I saw you carry Emily out, when I saw how you didn't argue or beg, I knew he was wrong. I knew you were different, and I should have told you sooner." The silence that followed was thick with winter and fear. "I didn't help you to fix anything," Harper said. "I helped because I saw someone worth standing beside. I just didn't know how to say that." Michael took a breath, then another. He didn't walk away. He reached out instead, brushing a snowflake from her hair with the gentlest touch. "You saw me," he said simply. "That's more than most people ever did." Harper looked up at him, eyes shining, lips parting to respond, only to find she couldn't speak. She didn't need to, because he leaned in, not fast, not sudden, just close enough that the cold disappeared, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The call came again the next morning. Same number, same tone. Carl Henderson's voice buzzed through the receiver with polished confidence, like opportunity dressed in a suit. "We'd still love to have you, Michael. You'd be running your own team, company van, benefits, relocation package. You'd start Monday if you say yes today." Michael stood just outside the garage, snow melting on the shoulders of his jacket, the winter sun creeping up over the ridge behind the house. He looked through the open bay door where Emily was coloring at the old workbench, her telescope leaning against the wall beside her. A paper crown from her birthday rested on her head, tilted and proud. And Harper. Harper was inside the guest house, probably sipping her second cup of tea, the fire crackling behind her. She hadn't asked him to stay, not once, but she had offered him everything else: room, trust, warmth, and that steady, quiet thing people only give when they believe in you. Michael turned away from the view and brought the phone back to his ear. "It's a great offer," he said carefully. "Best you'll get this side of the state," Carl added. Michael exhaled, not from uncertainty, but from clarity. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not the same man I was when you first called." Carl hesitated. "Meaning?" Michael smiled faintly. "Meaning, my life's not just about surviving anymore. I've got something here. Not flashy, not big, but real." "You sure about that? Opportunities like this don't come around often." "I know," Michael said, "but the right ones, when they do come, they don't make you leave the people who made you feel whole." Carl went quiet. Then, in a clipped tone, said, "Well, good luck to you." "You too," Michael replied, ending the call. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked back toward the garage. Emily looked up and beamed. Harper stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in a blanket, eyes searching his. Michael didn't say a word. He just smiled. He wasn't running anymore. He was home. The garage smelled like sawdust and possibility. Morning light spilled through the newly cleaned windows, dancing across the concrete floor that once felt like a graveyard of forgotten tools. Now the space was buzzing, quietly at first, but enough to feel alive. Michael stood at the workbench, guiding a young woman through how to change the brake pads on an old sedan. Her hands shook at first, uncertain, but he was patient, steady, just like someone had once been with him. In the corner, a father practiced soldering wires for a basic electrical circuit, pausing every few minutes to check on the toddler strapped into a stroller beside him. At another table, a teenage girl leaned over a small engine, her brow furrowed in concentration as Emily offered her encouraging tips she'd picked up from her dad. It wasn't a business anymore. It was something better, a place where people came not just to fix things, but to rebuild themselves. Harper had been the first to say it out loud. "You don't just need a shop," she'd told him one night over dinner, her voice calm, eyes lit with certainty. "This town needs a space where people like you can teach people like them a real second chance, and I want to help you build it." At first, Michael resisted. He didn't want to be anyone's charity project. But Harper had never once treated him like a cause. She believed in him, trusted him, and now that belief was painted across every wall of the garage that had once been forgotten. She helped fund the tools, the benches, the classroom kits. She did it quietly, without fanfare. When people asked how it started, Michael always said the same thing: "Someone saw something in me before I remembered how to see it in myself." Now the sign above the garage door read, "Turner Trades, built on grit, shared with grace." And every time Michael stepped inside, he didn't see a mechanic's shop. He saw hope. In every open hand, in every scraped knuckle, and in every person who walked in thinking they were too broken to learn and walked out knowing they could build. The Bennett boardroom hadn't changed. Still marble floors, still the same long gleaming table polished to the point of absurdity, still the same wall of glass overlooking the city like it belonged to them. Harper walked in with quiet confidence, dressed in slate gray slacks and a soft navy blouse, not power clothes, purpose clothes. The room quieted when she entered. Her brother Richard, seated at the head of the table, blinked once, clearly surprised. He stood smoothing his tie like it mattered. "Well, look who decided to remember where she came from." Harper didn't bite. She simply took the empty seat at the far end and folded her hands in front of her. I'm not here to reclaim anything, she said calmly. I'm here to give something away. That got their attention. Brows lifted, laptops lowered. Richard leaned forward, suspicion creasing his face. What are you talking about? My shares, Harper said. All of them. The room went still. I'm donating them, she continued, to a community trust fund, one that will invest in local trades, single-parent job training programs, small-town development. She looked directly at Richard. Places you all write off as unprofitable. Richard's jaw tightened. That's your inheritance. Your legacy. Harper's voice didn't waver. No, that's your idea of legacy. Mine looks different now. And what exactly are you building instead? He snapped. She smiled, slow and sure. Something that doesn't measure worth in dividends. A few board members exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond. One cleared his throat, nervously scribbling on a notepad. You're making a mistake, Richard said, softer now, almost pitying. You're walking away from power. No, she said, standing. I'm walking toward purpose. And with that, she slid the paperwork across the table and left without another word. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Harper felt something she hadn't felt in years. Light, free, unshackled from a name that once told her who to be. She wasn't building a dynasty anymore. She was building people. The living room was a mess of crayons, glitter, and construction paper, Emily's favorite kind of chaos. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked on her school project, Draw Your Home and the People Who Live There. Michael watched from the couch, half listening to the news, half lost in thought. The past few weeks had been a blur of sawdust and sunrise, hope and hard work. He hadn't even realized how much had changed until the world started feeling less like something to survive and more like something to build. Harper walked in carrying mugs of cocoa, setting one on the table beside Michael and slipping quietly to the floor next to Emily. Need help? She asked. Nope, Emily said proudly. Almost done. She added one last line with a purple crayon, then held it up for them to see. 3 stick figures, one tall with short, messy hair and a wrench in his hand. One smaller, wearing a crown and holding a star. And the third, a woman with long brown hair, arms stretched around them both. Above them, in crooked bubble letters, one word, home. Michael stared at the paper, something catching in his chest. His throat tightened. He blinked, once, then again. But the lump didn't move. Is that me? Harper asked gently, pointing to the woman. Emily looked up at her like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Of course. Who else would it be? Michael didn't speak, couldn't. He just stared at the drawing, his hand gripping the cocoa mug like it was the only thing tethering him to the moment. Harper's eyes shimmered. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Emily's ear. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever drawn me, she whispered. Emily beamed. Because it's true. Michael finally cleared his throat, voice low. You didn't even ask. Emily shrugged. I didn't have to. And for once, no one tried to fill the silence that followed, because they all knew. That word, home, wasn't about a place anymore. It was about them. The morning was cool, the sky washed in soft gold as the sun crept over the hills. Neighbors had gathered outside the garage, bundled in coats and scarves, their breaths curling into the air like small, hopeful prayers. Emily stood near the front with her handmade camera, 2 toilet paper rolls taped to a cereal box, narrating the scene to anyone who would listen. History's happening today, she declared with the confidence only a 7-year-old could carry. Michael adjusted the ladder one more time, wiping his palms on his jeans. The new sign rested at the top, covered with a large canvas tarp. He glanced toward Harper, who stood beside him, holding a cup of steaming cider, eyes bright but calm. You sure about this? He asked quietly, nodding toward the sign. Harper looked up at him, steady. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. With a nod, Michael climbed the last rung and gave the rope a firm pull. The canvas fell away. Gasps and scattered applause followed as the words came into view, carved into reclaimed wood, each letter painted by hand, simple but strong. Turner and Bennett trades built on grit, backed by grace. Michael stared at it for a long moment, something warm and full rising in his chest. Not pride exactly, something gentler, like a weight had been lifted and replaced with purpose. Harper stepped closer, her voice soft beside him. "You made the grit. I just helped carry the grace." He smiled. "I never thought I'd see my name on anything that wasn't a bill." "Well," she said, taking his hand, "you're allowed to see more now." The crowd began to drift forward, curious and smiling. Former clients, new students, old friends. The garage wasn't just a shop anymore. It was a place people came to learn, to build, to start again. And now it had two names on the wall, names that once came from opposite worlds, but had found something unshakable in the middle, not just partnership, but belief. The smell of engine oil and sawdust still lingered in the garage as the last of the day's trainees packed up their tools. Michael stood by the workbench, organizing socket wrenches into their newly labeled drawers, when the sleek black town car rolled to a stop out front. The door opened, and out stepped Charles Whitmore, sharp suit, silk scarf, every inch the polished corporate man, the kind of person who wore legacy like cologne. Harper recognized him instantly. "Old family friend," she muttered, her tone unreadable. Whitmore stepped inside like he owned the place, scanning the walls, the floor, the sign above the door. He nodded once, seemingly impressed, before extending a hand to Michael. "Mr. Turner," he said, "we haven't met, but I've heard quite a bit about you." Michael shook his hand, firm, neutral. "I watched the launch online," Whitmore continued, glancing around. "What you've done here is remarkable. I'd like to help you take it further." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Further how?" "Franchising, satellite locations, full curriculum development, think bigger, national reach. We've already got investors interested." Michael glanced at Harper, who stayed quiet, letting him speak. "I appreciate the offer," he said slowly. "Really. But this isn't a business model to me." Whitmore blinked. "I don't follow." "This garage, it's not about reach or profit or brand recognition. It's about real people. People who've been told no so many times they forgot how to try again. This place gave them that back. And I'm not about to sell it to someone who sees it as a line on a portfolio." Whitmore offered a tight smile, the kind people use when they're not used to hearing no. "You're turning down a future." "No," Michael said, steady. "I'm protecting the one we're already building. This stays personal." Whitmore nodded once, more out of formality than respect, and left without another word. As the car pulled away, Harper came to stand beside Michael, sliding her hand into his. "You didn't even flinch," she said. He gave a small smile. "Why would I? I already said yes to the only future that matters." It was a quiet evening at the guest house, the kind where the sky glowed lavender and the world felt like it had finally exhaled. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Harper sat cross-legged on the rug with Emily, sorting puzzle pieces and sipping from a mug that read, "Garage Girls Do It Better." Michael was in the kitchen, humming off-key as he dried dishes, the soft rhythm of domestic life echoing between the walls they'd come to share. Emily was unusually quiet, her eyes darting between Harper and a folded piece of paper in her lap. She'd been fidgeting all evening, clutching it like it held a secret too big to keep. Finally, as Harper reached for the puzzle box, Emily sat up straighter, cheeks flushed. "I made you something," she said, voice a little wobbly. Harper smiled, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You did? What is it?" Emily held out the note, folded neatly and tied with a piece of yarn. "You have to read it out loud." Harper untied the string and unfolded the paper carefully. In purple crayon, written in big, crooked letters, "Would it be okay if you stayed forever?" Harper blinked. Her heart stuttered in the most unexpected way. She looked over at Michael, who stood frozen by the sink, a dish towel in one hand, a look on his face that was part amusement, part vulnerability, and entirely something deeper. Emily tugged at Harper's sleeve. "You don't have to say yes right now, but I thought maybe you should know you're already part of us." Harper opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "Yes, of course, yes." Emily threw her arms around her, nearly knocking them both over. Laughter filled the room, rich and honest. Michael set the towel down and walked over, his eyes soft. "I guess that's our version of a proposal," he said. Harper looked up at him, still holding Emily close. "It's the only kind I ever needed." The classroom was bright and buzzing, filled with chatter and the sound of pencils tapping against desks. A poster on the wall read, "Family History Week, Where We Come From and Who Helped Us Get Here." Each student had a story, a photo, a diagram of their family tree, but when it was Emily's turn, she didn't bring a PowerPoint or a scrapbook. She brought a toolbox, worn, polished, and engraved with a phrase that had become her compass, "For the man who repairs what others throw away." She stood in front of the class, taller now, older, but with the same fierce sparkle in her eyes. She cleared her throat, holding the toolbox in both hands. "My story doesn't start with a place," she said. "It starts with a moment." The room quieted. "My dad lost his job the same night our heater broke. It was snowing. We didn't have a lot back then, just an old car, a tiny apartment, and each other. I was asleep when it happened, wrapped up in his coat. But I remember waking up and seeing him carry me down the street in the cold. He was trying so hard not to let me feel how scared he was." She paused, smiling faintly. "And then someone saw us. Someone who didn't drive past. Her name was Harper. She opened her door, her home, and eventually her heart." A teacher wiped at her eyes quietly in the back row. "They didn't fall in love right away, not in a fairy tale way. They built it, like you build a garage or a life, piece by piece. Now they run a place where people come to learn, to fix things, to believe in themselves again, and every time I walk into that garage, I remember our future didn't come from a job offer. It came from a moment of kindness." Emily held up the toolbox. "This belonged to my dad. It still does. But it also belongs to every person who walks into that garage and finds a reason to try again." The class clapped, and somewhere beneath the clatter of desks and applause, the future she spoke of stood quietly, proud and listening, just outside the door. The sign out front had faded a little over the years, its wood softened by rain and time, but the letters still stood proud. Turner and Bennett Trades, built on grit, backed by grace. Tourists stopped to take photos beneath it, curious about the small-town garage with the big reputation. Some came for the story, some came for the training, others came just to say they'd seen the place where second chances weren't just offered, they were expected. Inside, the air smelled of motor oil, coffee, and warm sawdust. Laughter echoed from the back, where a new group of students practiced changing brake pads under Michael's guidance. Emily, now a young woman, stood behind the counter, greeting newcomers with the same easy confidence her father once carried alone. Harper floated between stations, clipboard in hand, checking supplies, offering encouragement, remembering every name. Visitors often asked how it all began. They'd point to the old photo near the entrance, Michael in a worn jacket, Emily perched on his shoulders, Harper beside them, wind in her hair and light in her eyes. Locals always smiled when the question came. They'd look toward the bench outside, the one just beside the garage doors, and say, "It started right there? With a man who lost his job, a sleeping child in his arms, and the woman who saw them and didn't walk away." Some called it luck, others called it fate. But those who knew the full story called it something else. Grace. Because in a world obsessed with success, this place was built on something quieter, something stronger. The courage to show up, the decency to care. The power of a single moment to rewrite everything, and as the garage hummed with life and hope, and the sound of things being fixed, not just machines, but people. It stood as a quiet monument to where it all began.
Not in wealth,
Not in power, but in a blizzard on the side of the road when someone chose to help without knowing it would change all three of their lives forever.